Hi everybody. Grab that review sheet that you worked on Friday. We're going to do one of each type of problem to get you ready for today's quiz. So first up is number 3. The question is to write the prime factorization for 120. Basically what this is asking us to do is to break down 120 into the prime factors that we can multiply together to get 120. So this is where we make that factor tree. So we need to find two numbers that multiply to equal 120. This is the part where there's a few different ways to do it. So when I see 120, I think 10 and 12. But if you thought a different set of numbers like 2 times 60, that's okay. We'll still get the same answer in the end. So I picked 12 and 10. And you can also use your multiplication table for this kind of thing. If you weren't sure what numbers worked, find 120 on the multiplication table and then work your way out to see what numbers multiply to equal 120. So 12 times 10 is 120. 12 is not prime. I can break that down again. I know 3 times 4 is the same thing as 12. 3 is prime, so I'm going to circle that one. 4 is not, though. 4 I can break down into 2 times 2, and 2 is a prime number. So we're done with that side. Now 10 is not prime. 10 is the same thing as 2 times 5, and those are both prime numbers. Now for your answer, we need to take all those prime numbers, the ones that we circled, we're going to put them in numerical order. So 120 is really the same thing as 2 times 2 times 2 times 3 times 5. Now a good thing to do is to double check your answer. So actually go through 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, 8 times 3 is 24, 24 times 5 is 120. That way you can make sure you didn't make a little mistake. Now flip to number 7. Now we have 3 different terms up here, and we have to find the biggest term that will divide evenly into each one of those terms. So first thing we need to do is take a look at the numbers. So I'm going to do the factor tree for 15, and then I'm going to do it for 20, and then 10. So 15 I know is 3 times 5, and those are both prime numbers. 20 I can break down into 2 times 10. 2 is prime, but 10 I can still break down. 10 is the same thing as 2 times 5. And then right here we have 10, which can be broken down into 2 times 5. So here's where we're going to take each term and write out the prime factors. So we're going to take the prime factors we just found, the numbers, put them in numerical order, but now we have to take this x squared. X squared is the same thing as x times x. And then y, that's just y to the first, so we only write it once, and then z squared, which is z times z. Do the same thing for 20x cubed z squared. So 20 is the same thing as 2 times 2 times 5. We have this x cubed right here. So that means I got to multiply x by itself 3 times. And then we have z squared, which is z times z. Now take that last term, 10xy to the 5th z cubed. 10 I can write out as 2 times 5. We have 1x, and then we have to write y 5 times. And then we have to write z 3 times. And now we need to look for what factors are in every single list here. So I see a 5 in every list, so that gets circled. I see just one x in every list. not everything has a y, but there's 2 z's it looks like in every list. So now what I'm going to do is take just one set of these factors. So every list has a 5, an x, a z, and a z. For the GCF, I'm going to multiply one set of those factors. So 5x, and then z times z is the same thing as z squared. Look at number 9 on the review sheet. This one is slightly different than the last one. We're going to do the same steps we just did with number 7, but we're going to take it one step farther. So the directions here say factor using the GCF. So the first step, we need to find the GCF of these two terms. So I'm going to start the same way I did this last one. 10, I'm going to do the factor tree. 10 can be broken down into 2 and 5. Right here, this is really negative 30. So first we're going to break it down into -1 and 30. Always do the -1 first if you're ever doing this for a negative number. 30 I can break down into 2 and 15. Or you could have done 6 and 5 or 3 and 10. Does not matter. 2 is prime. 15 is not. 15 is the same thing as 3 times 5. Now, just like we did before, I'm going to take each one of those terms and write out the prime factorization. So 10 was the same thing as 2 times 5. I have x to the 4th. So that means I have to write x 4 times. The second term is negative 30x squared. It looks like I forgot to circle the -1 right there. So -1 times 2 times 3 times 5. This one has an x squared, so we have to multiply x by itself 2 times. Now remember, we're looking for what each list has in common. So each one of them has a 2, each one has a 5, and each one has 2 x's. So the GCF in this case, I'm going to take one row of what I just circled. So right here, for instance, 2 times 5 times x, our GCF is 10x squared. So this is what we did in the last problem, but this one is asking us to factor. So we are actually not done. Now we're going to make the box. And remember, we're doing the opposite of what you guys did in the last unit. So this time, we're going to take, this is kind of like the answer from what you guys did in chapter 6. This is going to go on the inside. So 10x to the 4th goes in the first box. Negative 30x squared goes in the second box. Now that GCF you just found is going to go right out front. So our GCF, 10x squared. We took out the biggest factor from each term. Now we're going to figure out what we needed to multiply by to get this answer. So now we're going to fill in the top of the box. So there's a few different ways you could think about this. Maybe the simplest way is to look at your leftovers. So here's 10x to the 4th. Look back what we did up here. The few circled things, that was the GCF. Those guys went out front, but we have 2 factors right here that we didn't use yet. Those go up top. So x times x, x squared. So sometimes I refer to the top numbers up here. Really what goes up here are the leftovers. What didn't I circle when I was doing the GCF? From the negative 30x squared, there was a -1 and a 3 left. So -1 times 3 is -3. And then double check x squared right here times 10x squared. That is 10x to the 4th. 10x squared times -3 is -30x squared. So the last part is just to write out your final answer. The GCF goes out in front of the parentheses. and those values that were on top go inside. So right here, this is your final answer. Alright guys, good luck on your quiz today.